This is my verse map for tonight. I know that you probably can't read it because it's backwards. Linda Lee from your churches. Oh, tell her I said hey. Okay. The verse today was recommended by Mike Jones. Who Mike Jones? Yes, Mike Jones. Fulton 1911, who is on here. So all your questions, direct them to him because he recommended that I verse map this verse. So we're gonna get into it. It comes from the Old Testament, Genesis 3rd chapter 6th verse. And yeah, Genesis is the first chapter in the first book in the Bible. So I know we like, okay, when nobody was like born from the dirt when Genesis was written, because you know we came from the dirt and we should return to the dirt. And nobody had done that at that time because in Genesis they talk about the creation. So, who wrote the book of Genesis? I never thought about that until I tried to study this verse today. But what I found was that this book was written like 300 years before Moses came to existence. But people still reference Moses as being the writer of this book. Let me see. Yeah, both of my Amplified and my King James version both have the first book of Moses, commonly called Genesis, at the beginning of it. So, yeah, that's what we're gonna roll with. Moses wrote it. And so the section headings that it falls under, this verse falls under, is the fall of man, the temptation of man, and the temptation and the fall of man. So one has fall of man, one has temptation of man, and one has both. So let's get into it. Genesis 3rd chapter 6th verse says, this is not the version that came from any of my 3 hard copy Bibles, but this came from my phone when I looked it up, and I like this version, so this is the one I'm gonna roll with. It's the New International Version. It says, the woman was convinced. The very first sentence, the woman was convinced. She saw that the tree is beautiful and its fruit looked delicious, and she wanted the wisdom it would give her. So she took some of the fruit and ate it. Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too. This is a very juicy story. We talk about this all the time. Women, because from this story we get the pains of childbirth, and you know, women just joke about how when they get to heaven and they see Eve, they're gonna slap her in her face. All of that. So, and if you read a little bit past it, it gets a little petty because Adam actually really throws Eve under the bus when God comes back and is like, I told you not to eat the fruit. You ate the fruit. What happened? And he's like, she gave it to me. The one that you set me up with, she gave it to me. Anyway, so the first sentence, the woman was convinced. So I want to know, who was she convinced by? The enemy. If you read before this verse, it talks about how it was a serpent. He was you know, conniving. He was beguiling, and he talked to her, and she said, oh no, God said we couldn't eat this fruit because if we eat it, we're gonna die. And he said, no, that's not true. If you're gonna die, he said, no, that's not true. You're not gonna die. God just told you that because he knows that you know, will come into the knowledge of what's good and what's evil, and you'll be a God, little g. You'll be like a God, little g, like him. And so she saw that, and he convinced her. So that's mistake number 1. She was convinced by the enemy and not God. God had already told her what was going to happen But thankfully, this to me, I would say, is the first demonstration. Yeah, I am late, dear Miss Sorry. This was the first demonstration of grace because God told her, if you eat this, you gonna die. She ate it, and I think that's when, we might have been, from my interpretation, we might have been living eternally had this not happened, because in Genesis 3rd chapter, same chapter, you go to the 19th verse. It says, by the sweat of your face you will eat bread until you return to the ground, for from it you were taken, for you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So this leads me to believe that we might have been just like, walking around earth forever had Eve never done this. But oh, okay, what verse are we on? This is Genesis 3rd chapter 6th verse. We're talking about the fall of man, when Eve ate the apple. So it leads me to believe that maybe, we could have been, eternal souls walking around here. But when all of that changed, God was like, okay, now I told you was gonna die, you'll die eventually. It's not like you just gonna eat the fruit and kill over and die. You'll die eventually. So she was convinced by the enemy and not God. So that's, like I said, mistake number one. Make sure that when you are convinced of something, you need to be convinced by the right one. It needs to be him and not him. Him with a capital H, not him with a little h. So Mike said that was God's original intention for us to live forever. But Eve came along and she messed it all up. So then this second sentence says, she saw that the tree was beautiful and its fruit looked delicious. So I've been reading, I just finished a plan on the armor of God, and one of the devotions talked about seeing with your spiritual eyes and not your natural eyes. So she looked with her natural eyes, and she saw that the tree looked good, and she saw that the fruit looked delicious. It looked okay. Everything that the enemy was telling her with her natural eyes, everything looked copacetic. But that was not the case. And I just wanted to point out to you all something that I came across in the devotion. And the plan is in 2 Kings 6th chapter, when the prophet Elisha was leading this soldier into battle against the Arameans, I believe. And he prayed that he already knew that they were going to win, but he prayed that the soldier would see that God was providing for the victory for them. And so the soldier was like, Elisha, what we gonna do? They are numbering us. We about to die. They about to kill us. It's over. This is the day that we die. What do we do? So then Elisha was like, Lord, open his eyes and let him see. We outnumber them more than what they have, what they bring in against us. So then the soldier opened his eyes, and he was able to see all of the horses and chariots that surrounded the mountaintop. So when you see things before you and you get convinced of certain things, that's the second thing that you should do. You should pray to see with your spiritual eyes and not your natural eyes, because your natural eyes can be misleading. Things can be hidden from you. You could be seeing in the flesh and not in the spirit, which God provides us with the Holy Spirit. And in one of my study Bibles that also brought me to 1 John 2:16. Before I get into that, I will answer this question. DeBrico asks, why do you do this? Are you a preacher or a church leader? No, I'm not a preacher nor a church leader. I am a student. who likes to study the Bible. So at the beginning of the year, I wanted to know more about the Word and more about God. And so one of my goals was to verse map every week to learn about the Bible. When I began to do that, I realized that I was learning some really good things and that there were nuggets and jewels that I felt people could learn from that I should share. So that's why I share what I learned, because I feel like it can help people. So, going back to the second sentence that says she saw that the tree was beautiful and the fruit looked delicious, and she wanted wisdom. She wanted the wisdom it would give her. One of my Bibles pointed out 1 John 2nd chapter 16th verse. It says, "For all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but of this world." So that tells you right there that everything that happens is not of God, but it's of this world. This world that we were born into sin from when man first fell, from this first sin when they disobeyed God. We were born into a world where, you know, we have as humans, we have lust of our flesh, our body. So I always think of lust of the flesh as your hormones and your desires that don't align with God's word and things like that. The lust of the eyes, things that you want when you see them. Eve saw the tree, she saw the fruit, it looked good, it probably was smelling good. She wanted to taste it. The serpent told her about the good things that would happen when she ate it, and she, took pride in doing that. And it tells us in 1 John that that's not from God, that's not of God, that's of the world. And so it also well, let me skip down to this last sentence, which is, I think, why Mike suggested this scripture. It says, "Then she gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it too." No questions asked. He knew that God told him not to eat that fruit. She said, "Hey, baby, taste this. I want to see something real quick. I want to see if we really going to die like God said, or we going to, be, good and in spirit like, this serpent over here says." And he ate it with no questions asked. And so that brings me to something that one of my bosses told me. This is the first boss I had after I graduated. We worked as a team, but sometimes we would do things that, like we would say, "Oh, I got it." And he taught us, he said, we got each other's back. We trust each other, but trust but verify. Trust but verify. And so when you're in relationship with people, you need to know who they're listening to. Because one, she was convinced by the enemy and not God. So, he could have trusted her. That maybe God gave her another word that he gave him. I don't know. But that was his time to verify. I'm sure he trusted her. That was his girl. She came from his flesh. God took his rib. There she was. He opened his eyes and, oh my God, it's woman. You're bone of my bone, flesh of my flesh. I trust you all day. You got my back like 4 flats on a Cadillac. But when she gave it to him, that was his shining moment to ask, okay, God told us not to do this. Why are we doing this? Right? He should have asked. He didn't. He trusted, but he didn't verify. And then it goes on, and what another part of my Bible referred to 1 Timothy 2:14, and Adam was not deceived, but the woman being deceived fell into transgression. It wasn't Adam. It was Eve. It was Eve all day. But guess what? They were together. If this was like today and this was a robbery and she took the apple from, well, we don't know if it was an apple. Everybody said it was an apple. That's a man-made, you know, trait of a story. The Bible, I've never seen apple. But anyway, it says fruit. Say they was in Kroger and she's like, here, baby, taste this apple. And then they walk out, you know, she is going to be, you know, the one on trial, but he's also going to trial for being an accomplice. So, it says Adam wasn't the one. It was Eve. But he did not trust. He trusted, but he did not verify. And you have to, when you are, no matter if it's a friendship, no matter if it's a co-worker, no matter if it's a marriage, you need to know when you're in relationship or partnership or friendship, covenant, whatever with somebody, you need to know who they're listening to. You need to know who they're listening to. You need to know if they're praying. You need to know if they asking God for spiritual eyes, if they asking God for something he never promised them. You need to ask them, you need to know if they asking God to be in his will or if they trying to be outside of his will, doing stuff they ain't got no business doing. You need to know. That's why it's important when you have growing friendships, when you're getting to know people, you need to know. I had somebody ask me one time, who do you listen to? Other than your preacher, who do you listen to? Who has your ear? Is it your friend? Is it your mom? Is it your dad? The pastor this past Sunday, yesterday I guess it was, he said, show me the 5 most prevalent people in your life and I'll show you the trajectory for the rest of your life. Because if at work you surround yourself with people who hate their job and don't want to prosper, who don't like their bosses, then guess what? You'll be in the same boat. If you're married and you surround yourself with women who are unhappy in their marriage, who are always down in their husbands, women who are single, who are down in your husband, then guess what? Their energy is gonna spill into you. I talk all the time about what you're feeding your spirit and your soul when it comes to the things you watch and the music you listen to. You listen to music about sex, drugs, and alcohol, guess what you're more inclined to get into? Sex, drugs, and alcohol. I hate to break it to you, but I remember when I was in like this youth church type thing, and this deacon, I'll never forget, Deacon Bridgman, he gave such a clear metaphor. He said, y'all, what y'all wake up in the morning and eat on Sunday morning? And we was like, eat grits, eggs, bacon, pancakes, waffles, cereal, toast. He said, well, me, I like biscuits. You know what I like to eat with my biscuits? The Blackburns maple syrup. And we was like, oh yeah, we like biscuits and syrup. We like biscuits and syrup. He said, you know how when you get that biscuit and you put it in that syrup, that biscuit is gonna sop up that syrup. It's going to soak it up. Just like you put sponge in the water, it's going to permeate through the sponge. The syrup is going to permeate through the biscuit. So you think that you have self-control and discipline. Listen here, you're a sponge. You surround yourself in water, you're going to soak it up. You're just like a biscuit. You put yourself in some Blackburns maple syrup, you're going to be sopping it up. So, listen to God, not Satan. See with your spiritual eyes and not your natural eyes. Your spiritual eyes are not something that just come to you. You have to pray for your spiritual eyes. You have to put on the armor of God. You need to read about all the different tools and things that come with the armor of God, and you need to read about how to access those tools, because they're not just, they're not just laying around. You have to, seek out the tools and the armor of God and put it on, and really, immerse yourself in the Word of God. So that is the verse map for today. I hope y'all have a good week. Peace out.